Before we start the video, I wish you all a new year full of health, peace, and many accomplishments. May 2025 be an amazing year for all of us. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get into the video. Ruby adjusted her silver curls in front of the mirror as a sly smile formed on her face. She leaned in closer and murmured, "I still got my charm." It was a warm afternoon in Savannah, Georgia, and the community hall buzzed with energy. Cheerful music echoed off the walls as Ruby, with her usual grace, guided Charles across the dance floor. He was a charming man with clumsy moves, but a smile so wide it made everyone forget his missteps. "Are you really sure about this, Ruby?" Charles asked. She let out a hearty laugh, holding his hands firmly. "Absolutely, Charles. I don't know how much time we have left, but I want to spend it with you." The proposal had been simple, but deeply meaningful. Charles didn't bring expensive rings or rehearsed speeches. He just held her hands during a walk and said he wanted to grow old with her, even if they were already old. Ruby accepted without hesitation. That evening, when Ruby got home, she picked up the phone and called Michael, her only son. "Hi, sweetheart. I was thinking of inviting you to lunch tomorrow. I have something to tell you." Michael, always busy, hesitated before responding. "Sure, Mom. Noon at the usual spot?" Ruby agreed, hanging up the phone with a sigh of relief. She knew Michael was protective, maybe too much so, but she was determined to share her happiness. The next day, the restaurant was calm, filled with the familiar scent of fresh bread and coffee. Michael arrived right on time, wearing a dress shirt and carrying an expression of mild concern. "So, what's going on, Mom?" he asked. Ruby smiled, adjusting the hoop earrings she'd worn for decades. "Well, I wanted to tell you that I'm engaged." Michael blinked a few times, as if trying to process the words. "Engaged? To who, Mom?" "Charles, that wonderful man I met at the dance group." There was a long, uncomfortable pause. Michael crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair. "Mom, are you sure about this? I mean, how long have you known him? And what do you really know about him?" Michael's protective tone was like a wall between them. Ruby took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I know enough, Michael. I know that he's good to me, and that's what matters." "Don't you think you're rushing into this, getting married at 82? Ruby felt the words like a blow, but kept her smile steady. "At 82, I know life doesn't wait for anyone." Michael shook his head, clearly unhappy, and silence hung between them as lunch was served. The silence in the restaurant seemed louder than the conversations around them. Ruby kept a calm expression, but she felt the weight of Michael's suspicious gaze. "It's not just about you, Mom. It's about our family. What do we know about this Charles? And why now?" Ruby set her silverware down and folded her hands, looking directly at her son. "Michael, I raised you to be a sensible man, but also to understand that happiness is precious. Don't you think I deserve a little of that?" Michael looked at his mother and said, "It's not that. Of course, I want you to be happy, but marriage? At this point in your life? What if he's only interested in what you have?" Ruby let out a short laugh, a mix of irony and exhaustion. "All I have are memories, Michael, and if he wants them, well, he's more than welcome to them." Michael couldn't help but smile briefly, but he soon returned to his rigid stance. "I'm just saying it seems too fast. You've gone decades without anyone. Why change now?" "Because I want to live what's left of my life," Ruby said. "I spent years taking care of you, your father, our home. I never thought I'd have another chance at love, but now I do, and I'm not going to waste it." Michael looked at his mother, trying to find flaws in her determination, but all he saw was the strong woman he had always admired. Still, he couldn't ignore his concerns. "All right, but before I can support this, I need to get to know Charles better. I want to talk to him." Ruby leaned forward, her eyes shining with surprise and a touch of relief. "That's fair, but please go into this conversation with an open heart." That same afternoon, Ruby returned home with a mix of relief and apprehension. Despite the discomfort, she was proud of herself for standing her ground. She knew Michael only wanted to protect her, but she was determined to show him that her decision wasn't a whim. Later, sitting in her favorite armchair, Ruby thought about how much time had shaped her relationship with Michael. When he lost his father as a teenager, she had to be strong enough for both of them. That strength now seemed like a bridge between the past and the present, supporting her choices. On the other side of the city, Michael drove in silence, still processing the conversation. His love for his mother was undeniable, but the idea of a stranger entering their lives unsettled him. He needed answers, and there was only one person who could provide them: Charles. Michael picked up the phone and dialed the number Ruby had given him. "Charles, it's Michael, Ruby's son. Can we talk?" Charles' voice answered on the other end of the line, warm and welcoming. "Of course, Michael, whenever you want." Michael ended the call. He wasn't sure what he was expecting to find, but he was determined to find out. The small wall clock in Charles' house read 5 in the afternoon when Michael arrived. It was a modest but cozy home, with old furniture and shelves filled with black and white photos. As soon as Charles opened the door, he extended his hand with a warm smile. "Michael, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Your mother talks a lot about you." Michael shook the man's hand firmly, studying him with a cautious look. "Thank you for having me, Charles. I just wanted to talk." "I understand. Please have a seat. I'll make some coffee." Michael looked around the room as Charles moved into the kitchen. One photo in particular caught his eye: a portrait of Charles with a smiling woman holding a small child. He also noticed a guitar leaning against the corner of the room, showing signs of frequent use. "That was my wife, Lorraine," Charles said, returning with 2 cups of coffee. "We lost her almost 15 years ago to cancer." "That's our son, Marcus. He lives in Detroit now." Michael took the cup, but remained reserved. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. But life teaches us to move on, doesn't it?" Lorraine used to say that happiness isn't a destination, but a journey. I think I finally understood what she meant when I met your mother." Michael raised an eyebrow. "And how did that happen?" Charles laughed. "Oh, it was during a dance class. I was all clumsy, stepping on everyone's feet, and then Ruby showed up. She taught me to move with the rhythm, but what really captivated me was how she lit up the room with her energy." Michael listened in silence, trying to ignore the warmth that colored Charles' words. Still, he couldn't shake his distrust. "You seem like a good man, Charles, but I'll be direct. Why the marriage? Why so fast?" Charles held the cup with both hands, thoughtful. "Because, Michael, when you meet someone like Ruby, someone who makes you feel alive again, you don't want to waste a single day." There was a heavy pause. Michael studied Charles' face, looking for signs of uncertainty, but all he saw was sincerity. "Look, I understand your concerns. If I were in your shoes, I'd have doubts too. but I want you to know that I love your mother, and my only intention is to make her happy." Michael took a deep breath, turning his gaze to the window. Charles' honesty was unsettling, but not enough to ease all of his fears. "I'm still not convinced," Michael said, "but I'll think about what you said." Charles smiled and replied, "That's all I ask." As Michael left Charles' house, he felt conflicted. Even though Charles' words seemed genuine, he couldn't shake the urge to protect his mother. He needed more time, but maybe, just maybe, Charles was what Ruby said he was, a chance for a new beginning. Michael drove home in silence, his mind replaying every detail of his conversation with Charles. When he parked in the driveway, his wife, Angela, was already waiting at the door with a warm smile. "How did it go?" she asked. Michael sighed. "I don't know. He seems like a good man, but something about all of this still doesn't sit right with me. I mean, marriage? Why can't they just be together without all the formality?" Angela placed her hand on his shoulder, the understanding look that Michael knew so well in her eyes. "Maybe because for your mom it's important. You know how much she values the commitments she makes." Michael leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I don't want her to get hurt. Losing her once when Dad died was hard enough. Now to think that someone else could come into her life and, I don't know, not be who he seems to be." Angela smiled softly. "Michael, you can't protect her from everything. She's a strong woman. If she believes this is right, maybe it's because she's found something real." Angela's words stayed with Michael as he headed upstairs. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old VHS tape with "Family" scrawled on the label. He inserted the tape into the player and hit play. On the screen, there was a younger, vibrant Ruby dancing with her husband. The way they looked at each other was a clear reminder of a deep, true love. Michael felt a tightness in his chest. He realized that even after his father's death, his mother had kept smiling, taking care of him, and keeping the memory of their love alive. Now, perhaps, she was just trying to find a new chapter of happiness. The next morning, Ruby made her usual walk to the cemetery, carrying fresh flowers. In front of her late husband's grave, she knelt, arranging the bouquet and running her fingers over the letters carved into the stone. "I hope you're okay with this. I never thought I'd love again, but Charles came along and brought life back into my days. I still miss you every day, but I know you'd want me to be happy." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the gentle breeze carry her confession. Meanwhile, Michael was sitting at his desk, staring at a framed picture of his mother on the table. He picked up the phone, dialed Ruby's number, and waited as the ringtone sounded. "Hello?" she answered. "Mom, I've thought a lot about all of this, and I think you might be right." Ruby smiled on the other end of the line, holding back the emotion in her voice. "I'm glad you're starting to understand. That means so much to me." "But I still want to make sure you're being taken care of," he said. "I'll be by your side, Mom, whatever your choice is." Months passed, and on that morning the sun was shining with a gentle breeze, and there was Ruby. She was surrounded by her longtime friends who were helping with the final preparations for the ceremony. The place was simple. White chairs arranged in front of a small arch adorned with vibrant flowers, a perfect reflection of Ruby's radiant personality. Ruby looked at herself in the mirror as she adjusted the beautiful, subtle bluish-gray dress she had chosen, elegant yet understated. Her best friend Louise took her hand and smiled. "You look stunning, Ruby. Charles won't be able to take his eyes off you." Ruby laughed, though she felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. "You know, Louise, I never imagined I'd live through this again. It feels like the universe is giving me a second chance." Louise squeezed her hand. "You deserve it." Meanwhile, downstairs, Charles was adjusting his beige suit while talking to Marcus, his son, who had come from Detroit especially for the occasion. "She's really special, Dad," Marcus said, watching Charles smile. "I'm glad you found someone like her." "So am I, son. Ruby has brought light into my days in a way I never thought was possible." Just before the ceremony began, Michael arrived. Ruby saw him from a distance and walked toward him. "You came," she said, taking his hand. Michael lowered his head for a moment before meeting her gaze. "Mom, I'm sorry for being so difficult. I just wanted to make sure you were doing the right thing. But now I see that you're happy, and that's all that matters." Ruby gave him a tight hug. "Thank you, my son." When the ceremony began, everyone stood up as Ruby made her entrance. She slowly walked down the makeshift aisle, holding a small bouquet of white flowers. Charles, waiting under the arch, couldn't hide his emotions when he saw her. The vows they exchanged were simple. Charles held Ruby's hands and said, "Ruby, you've brought a joy I thought I had lost forever. I promise to take care of you, honor you, and live each day grateful to have you by my side." Ruby smiled, tears streaming down her face. "Charles, you've reminded me that life doesn't stop as long as we have love to give. I promise to stand by you every step of the way until the end of our days." When the officiant announced that they were married, the guests stood and applauded. Ruby and Charles exchanged a brief yet tender kiss before turning to face the new chapter of their lives together. At the reception, Michael stood up to make a speech. His voice was a bit shaky, but full of sincerity. "Mom, when Dad passed, I thought I'd never see that spark in your eyes again. But today, it's here, stronger than ever. I know he would be proud of you, and so am I." Ruby hugged him, feeling that, in that moment, everything was in perfect harmony. The party was still lively in the backyard. The soft music from a local band filled the air, and Ruby watched everything with a warm heart. Charles stood by her side, holding her hand as they greeted the guests. "It looks like everyone is having a great time," Charles said, smiling at her. Ruby smiled back. Her friends were chatting happily at a nearby table, while Marcus was teaching some kids how to dance on the small makeshift dance floor. But what really caught her attention was Michael, who was walking toward her with a serene expression on his face. "May I steal the bride for a moment?" Michael asked Charles, who laughed before stepping aside to talk to Marcus. Michael and Ruby walked to a quieter corner of the garden. "Mom, I wanted to thank you for never giving up on me, even when I acted like a fool." Ruby furrowed her brow, confused. "Michael, you were never a fool. You've always been the son I needed." "Maybe, but I think I was so focused on protecting you that I forgot one important thing. You deserve to be happy, too." Ruby placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "And you weren't wrong for wanting to take care of me. It just shows how much you care." Michael smiled, a smile she hadn't seen in a long time. "I want you to know that I understand now. Charles is a good man, and if he makes you happy, then I'm with you on this, Mom." She hugged him tightly. "That means the world to me, Michael." Later, as the evening began to cool down, Charles led Ruby to the dance floor to the sound of her favorite song. Their movements were slow but graceful, as if time had stopped just for them. "Are you happy, Ruby?" he asked. "Very, Charles. I never imagined I would have something this beautiful again." As they danced, the guests gathered around, clapping and smiling. Michael, watching from a distance, felt a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. When the song ended, Ruby and Charles raised their champagne glasses to make a toast. Ruby then looked at everyone present and said, "Thank you to each of you for being part of this special day. This is a new chapter, and I'm grateful to write it with so much love and company." The applause echoed through the backyard, and as Ruby looked at Charles and Michael, she knew she had found exactly what she needed, a second chance to live, love, and dream.